Well, it is good to be together. I am here to tell the story of Ashura and the Battle of Karbala today. Again, I'm Abbey Tennis. It's good to be here. My pronouns are she and her. I'm your lead minister, and we're going to be talking about this story from the first 50 years or the first 100 years of the Islamic faith. So I think many of us know that the religion of Islam began in the 7th century with during the life of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, and led by him. And when the Prophet Muhammad died in 632, there was a dispute over who should lead the faith from there on. Some people, the majority of people, wanted to back Abu Bakr, who was a close companion of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him. And then a smaller group of people wanted to back the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, Ali. There was a big dispute, but they knew that the title of Imam would travel with these men through their sons and descendants from then on. Those who supported Ali later became known as Shiite Muslims, or the Shia. And so I want to tell the story of the Battle of Karbala. So this happened in 680 Common Era in the city of Karbala, which is in modern-day Iraq. During the holy month of Muharram, Yazid, who was a caliph in the Umayyad dynasty, so he was the majority who wanted Abu Bakr after the Prophet Muhammad passed away. Yazid was in this line. He ordered Imam Husayn, who was the leader on Ali's line, so the minority line, he ordered Imam Husayn to pledge allegiance to him. And Husayn refused Yazid's demand. He thought it was unjust and illegitimate, and it resulted in this massive 10-day battle in Karbala, which happened between Yazid's large army and then Husayn's small band. By the way, can you guys hear me now? Is the audio better? Okay, great. Yazid's army cut off food and water and supplies to Husayn's group, which included some people who were prepared for battle, but also his family, his children, people who were sick. Cut off food and water and supplies to them, among other things, as they were telling Imam Husayn that he had to pledge allegiance to Yazid's caliphate. And so on the day of Ashura, which is the 10th day of the month, Husayn was brutally murdered along with at least 70 of his group. And among the men who were there, the only man who survived was Husayn's sick son. The women were unveiled, which was a horribly dishonorable thing to do, humiliating thing to do, and brought to Damascus to be imprisoned at that time. So this is the story of the Battle of Karbala. It's a bloody battle. It's a complex moment in religious history in the Islamic faith. And it is a very important moment for many Muslims now, especially Shia Muslims around the world. So Ashura moves according to the lunar calendar as opposed to the Gregorian calendar, which we traditionally use. This year, Ashura is happening on Friday evening, August 28th through Saturday, August 29th. For Shia Muslims, who are about 15% of the 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, this is a day of mourning and grief. There are celebrations that include passion plays, reenactments of the battle, like bloody reenactments of the battle and processions, but also prayers and sermons and recitations of the Quran. And increasingly, others honor Ashura with acts of justice and service, so by organizing blood drives, for example, or pulling together free meals for their community, mosques pulling together free meals for their community. Because Ashura means more than just honoring this historic tragedy in religious history. It's also honored by the way we live out our lives every day. So today's service is called Every Day is Ashura, Every Place is Karbala, which is a quote from it's a common phrase in Muslim social justice circles, especially Shia ones. And we're not exactly sure who first said it. Many Muslims use the phrase as a way of connecting our current lives to the forces of oppression and resistance and our current lives and faith to that battle at Karbala so many years ago. By saying every day is Ashura, every place is Karbala, we're saying that oppression is not just something from the past, not just something that happened one day in 680 or happened one time in Karbala in Iraq, or one day of the year, one place in the world, but that it happens every day in every place. But not just oppression happens every day in every place, but justice leadership happens in every day, in every place, at every moment. Every day is Ashura, every place is Karbala. The injustice of Yazid's army, for example, cutting off supplies and food and water to Imam Husayn's people, including sick people, including children. It didn't just happen in the year 680 in the city of Karbala. It's happening right now. All we have to do is read the news to see that the moratorium on evictions and the moratorium on utility shutoffs are ending in the middle of a hot summer when people are out of work. That unemployment benefits have not been renewed yet when people are struggling and the economy is not at a place where people can easily find new jobs. All we need to do is look at the news to know that oppression like what happened at the Battle of Karbala is happening here right now. Every day is Ashura, every place is Karbala here in Philadelphia in 2020. And so injustice continues, but so does visionary leadership. And so we need look no further than this congregation, than the news, than all of the activists who are rising up for healthcare equity and for tenant rights, to see the same kind of stand that Imam Husayn and his followers took in the Battle of Karbala. When Yazid's army killed Imam Husayn and so many of his companions and children, his sister, Zainab, his sister, who was brought to Damascus with the other women, still continued to speak up, speak against injustice, and testify to her faith in what is seen as one of the, she's seen as one of the Prophet's teachers, Hazrati Zainab is what people call her, of the Islamic faith from way back in 680. So the Battle of Karbala is also seen as a time of women's leadership. When the women were left, they continued to fight the fight even after the men had been killed. We can see that kind of leadership happening for those fighting for housing rights, for those who are fighting for safe conditions and policies as schools are talking about reopening, for better healthcare, against racist violence. We see that visionary leadership today, and we are called to be part of that visionary leadership ourselves, because every day is Ashura, today is Ashura, and every place is Karbala. Philadelphia is Karbala. This is just a small sliver of this complicated historical religious story, the Battle of Karbala, and of the courageous leadership of Imam Husayn and Hazrati Zainab and others. And we tell this story not as the full message of the service today, but as part of the broader message that Mahyar and I have been reflecting on, of how we connect our history with our own courage, and how we connect with our resilience and our truth in this complex lives we lead, how we find inspiration from the past into living our lives better right now. And so I'm delighted to turn this over to Dr. Mahyar Antazari, who's my co-worship leader today, to share some more about his story and what this phrase and the history of this battle has meant to his family and his country of origin. So Mahyar, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Abby, for that introduction. And thank you to everyone who's joined us here today. So many of us have religious baggage. Religious baggage is what I call that emotional baggage that we accumulate because of experiences. whether our own or our families with organized religion. Maybe your religious baggage comes from being raised in a tradition that taught you that you must fit in, to conform to heteronormative molds, lest you be damned to hell. Or maybe your religious baggage comes from being punished for questioning dogma. I was born in Iran, and coming from the Islamic Republic, where dogma is law, my and my family's religious baggage is a super deluxe 15-piece set. My family's experiences are similar to the experiences of millions of other Iranians who left Iran in the 1980s. Both my parents grew up practicing Shi'i Islam, but in a time when the government didn't dictate religion. In 1979, millions of Iranians of different religious and political persuasions revolted against Iran's king, the Shah, a murderous dictator in a suit and a tie. In a perverted twist of historical irony, the Shah was replaced by Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, Iran had an even more murderous dictator in cleric's clothes. Then Iran was invaded by Iraq. When a ceasefire first became possible, Khomeini insisted that the holy war continue until the sacred city of Karbala, deep inside Iraq that Reverend Abbey was just talking about, was captured. Iran never took Karbala, but 1 million Iranians did die, mostly boys and young men, mobilized by Shi'i propaganda, evoking the epic Battle of Karbala, in which Imam Husayn, the Prophet's grandson, was martyred nearly 13 centuries earlier. And there were about 500,000 Iraqis who died in that war too. 4 years after the war started and 4 years before it ended, my family fled Iran so that my oldest brother wouldn't get drafted. Then there are the stories about Iran after the revolution that I heard from my mom as I grew up in California. 2 stories stuck with me. One, when my mom was pregnant with me and riding in a shared taxi, a woman got on and started yelling at her for not wearing black because that day was the anniversary of the death of one of the 12 Shi'i imams. The woman continued yelling at her, even though my mom said she didn't know. She kept yelling at her until the taxi driver pulled over and told that woman to get out. The other stories were about the sisters of Zainab, the same Zainab that you heard about in Reverend Abbey's sermon. And the Sisters of Zainab are the female vigilante morality police. You might be familiar with them if you saw the film Persepolis. The Islamic Republic made the veil mandatory and also instituted Islamist ideals of modesty. My mom saw these sisters in the street call women wearing makeup whores. She even read in the newspaper of one sister wiping a woman's lipstick with a tissue that had a razor hidden inside. I was only 4 by the time my family had accumulated all this baggage. A decade later, I inherited that baggage as an adolescent learning about my family history. Jaded by religion, my parents didn't raise us. They praised us a little bit. They didn't raise us to practice Islam. We never prayed. They drank once in a while, and the only time we went to a mosque was when my aunt dragged us there because of the free food they had during Ramadan for the iftar, the breaking of the fast. But none of us ever fasted. But my parents drew the line at pork on scientific grounds, and sadly, we never had a pepperoni pizza again after they found out that pepperoni wasn't beef. My own personal experience with Islam was a traumatic one. When I was 17, my family found out I was gay. For years now, my family has been more accepting than I could have ever dreamed. But that wasn't always the case. At 18, they almost disowned me. My family had been the only constant in my childhood as we moved from Iran to Germany to California. The fear of not belonging to my family traumatized me. I desperately wanted to fit in to the expectations set out for me by Iranian culture. So I went back into the closet. For the first time in my life, I started to practice Islam with the sole purpose of praying away the gate. Suffice it to say that my personal experience with Islam is one of internalizing homophobia. So yeah, there's a lot of baggage, and that's not even considering coming of age during 9/11 and in a climate of increasing Islamophobia in America. Like many people of Middle Eastern ancestry, I have experienced being profiled by border and customs officials, but my experiences haven't just been at airports. We like to think that Islamophobia is a Republican or red state thing. But the person who called me the Ayatollah and the other person who called me one of the good ones were both East Coast liberals. I have to admit, I have internalized Islamophobia too. Sometimes it feels as though to fit in, to remain one of the good ones, I need to disavow Islam. People sometimes assume that the reason I don't drink is because I'm Muslim. And maybe the fact that I have a beard adds to that misconception. Now, I wouldn't call these misconceptions microaggressions, but they are annoying. I mean, who likes incorrect assumptions made about them? I don't drink because I'm in recovery, and I have a beard because I'm vain. In the context of dating, I've often been asked if I'm a Muslim. And it's hard to answer. Because if I say yes, I worry about being Muslim. I worry that my being Muslim will define who I am to the other person, as Muslimness so often does in the Western imagination. Because all Muslims follow the 5 pillars, right? We all fast during Ramadan, pray 5 times a day, believe in God and Muhammad, give alms, and go to Mecca. As an agnostic, I don't believe in any prophets or holy books, and believe in God mostly when I'm desperate. I do pray every day, but those are prayers from the 12 steps. I never fast, and I never want to go to Mecca. And hell, I'm a Unitarian now. By some Muslim standards, such as those of the Islamic Republic of Iran, I'm an apostate. That, along with being gay, is a capital offense in Iran. If I say no when someone asks me if I'm Muslim, then I'm my roots. I mean, most days I recite Al-Fatiha, the first surah of the Quran that Reverend Abbey used in our prayer earlier. I do it when I leave home as a sort of OCD incantation so that nothing bad happens to my cats, but still. And I also recite it once in a while when I'm feeling extra anxious because saying the words calms me down. And I use expressions like inshallah and bismillah, phrases, Arabic phrases that Muslims use to invoke God's grace and blessing. So, long story short, the question, am I Muslim, isn't a simple one. It confronts me with a lot of vulnerabilities and also some of my own internalized Islamophobia. And the Islamophobia I've internalized isn't just the American Islamophobia that's born out of ignorance, but also the Iranian sort that's born out of experience. On the one hand, coming from a country that is a theocracy, I feel like there should be fear of Islam and of all religion. Religion can be and has been one of the most powerful ideologies for oppression and murder. On the other hand, the Islamophobia of Fox News and social media offends me, not just because of how racist it is, but also because of how it portrays a monolithic image of Muslims and Islam as anti-American and anti-Semitic, and makes the question, are you Muslim, so much more loaded in our society. I suppose the question of identity has been on my mind a lot lately because I turned 40 this summer, and in Islam, that's the age of decision. In Islam, that means that you have until 40 basically to decide, am I going to be a Muslim or not? But it's also been on my mind because of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests. One of the very few good things about the quarantine has been that I've reconnected with my cousins in Iran on WhatsApp. In our group chat, they asked me about the protests and why racism is still such a big problem in this country. My cousins are mostly observing Shia Muslims. As I was texting with them in Persian. I used the Arabic maxim, every day is Ashura, every place is Karbala. Kol yom Ashura, kol ard Karbala. To communicate to them the sense of resignation I felt to the insurmountability of injustice. When teaching Iranian history, I talk about that maxim and how it was also used as a revolutionary slogan. But I had never used it as part of my own living language. Every day is Ashura, every place is Karbala is both a call to accept the things you cannot change, as well as a call to change the things you can. And it's also a recognition of the fact that an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. It dawned on me then that in my own ancestral religious heritage, there are some teachings worth holding on to and incorporating into my eclectic belief system. I mean, I already draw from so many sources, from animism to Zoroastrianism, as well as the teachings of Buddhism, Christianity, and even pop culture, like Star Wars, Star Trek, and the Golden Girls. So why not Shiism? Of course, I am stripping that slogan from its cultural context. I am ignoring the multitude of practices and beliefs in Shiism specifically, and Islam generally, that I don't agree with and don't believe in. I'm cherry picking. Now, I know that cherry picking tends to have a negative connotation. When it comes to science or any sort of knowledge production, like that in the humanities, for instance, cherry picking means ignoring evidence, discounting your theories, and that is bad. Bad, bad, bad. But faith is not rational. Faith is not science. We don't have to follow those same rules. The fundamentalists sure as hell don't. For example, the Quran says there shall be no compulsion in religion. It also says you have your religion and I have mine. So the clerics in Iran are cherry picking when they arrest women for not veiling or when they persecute religious minorities. I'd even venture to say that people are almost always cherry picking when practicing religion. That's not necessarily a bad thing if we're picking out the good cherries, the ones that reaffirm life, liberty, and love. Why pick the rotten ones? One of the main things that attracted me to Unitarian Universalism is its affirmation of the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As long as we look to other traditions with respect and humility, this sort of cross-pollination can be an expression of humanity's interconnectedness. The philosopher of religion, Houston Smith, writes, "It is possible to climb life's mountain from any side, but when the top is reached, the trails converge. When the top is reached, the trails converge." One of the many other things I appreciate about UU is its embrace of the Sufi poem, "Come, come, whoever you are." In the original Persian, it goes, "Baz ah, har anche hasti baz ah. Gar kafir o gabr o bot parasti baz ah. In dargah ma dargah nomidi nist. Sad bar agar tobe shikasti baz ah." The original is a little different than our translation. Come again, whatever you are, whether an infidel, a Zoroastrian, or an idolater. Historically, the infidels, the Zoroastrians, and the idolaters were Islam's others, those who did not belong in the Ummah or community of believers. They were the ones persecuted in the name of God. Even the Sufis, the mystics of Islam, were at times themselves the targets of persecution. So there is something very sacred and enlightened in this Sufi poem that recognizes that we are all one. And indeed, unity is one of the highest, if not the highest, principle in Islam. Lastly, I'd like to close by returning to the questioning of my religious identity. This question isn't unique to me or to Muslims. How do you define your religious or spiritual identity? What do you include or exclude? Each and every one of you has had your own spiritual journey. I think of the people who have inspired my own journey. specifically cultural Jews and recovering Catholics. There is something brave about embracing such liminal identities and leaving conventional collectives to venture out into what Brene Brown calls the wilderness. In her book, Braving the Wilderness, she also argues that all too often in our innate need to find true belonging, we try to fit in. But fitting in is not the same thing as belonging. By venturing out in the wilderness, we find others like ourselves, the ones with whom we truly belong. In that book, Brene Brown repeatedly quotes words by Maya Angelou in a 1973 interview with Bill Moyers. Angelou spoke, "You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great." So, in that spirit, I identify as a Unitarian, as an Iranian, an American, a Californian, a Philadelphian, a sober person, a gay man, a teacher, an academic, a son, a brother, an uncle, and a friend. And yes, I am a Muslim, but I am also an infidel. Do I contradict myself? As Walt Whitman wrote, "Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." We all contain multitudes, and we all want to belong. So I invite you to join me as you are out there in that wilderness of true belonging, letting go of trying to fit in and leaning into the liminality and the contradictions of all the multitudes that make up our humanity.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.